Parshas Maseh is a little known, perhaps one of the most exciting parshas in the Torah, even though you would not expect that a parsha that talks about the boundaries and borders of Eretz Yisrael to be that exciting. Nevertheless, as we're about to see, Parshas Maseh provides us with one of the most unique topics we have ever discussed. The parsha in Perek Lamedal, Pasuk Beis, Pasuk says, Tzavis b'nei Yisrael, Yamarta aleim, ki atem ba'am el ha'aretz Canaan. You're coming to Eretz Canaan. Zois ha'aretz, this is the land. Asher tipo lachem benachla, that will fall to you in inheritance. Eretz Canaan, l'gvul oiseha, the land of Canaan by its borders. And the parsha goes on to explain the various borders of the land of Israel, from the north all the way up to Nahar Pras in the south, all the way down to Nachal Mitzrayim in the east, the Yarden in the west, the Yam HaTichon. Says the Vilna Gaon, the borders of Eretz Yisrael, the details are as important as the Torah itself. Shegvuleha, the boundaries, v'chol inyana, hein inyane Torah, they are the Torah itself. Rabbi say everybody knows, it's on everybody's mind, what's going on in Eretz Yisrael today, what's going on in the war in Gaza. And it's so interesting that throughout history there is something unique about that area of Eretz Yisrael, that it's always a sore spot. No matter when it was, whether it's in the times of the Shoftim, or whether it's since the last 50 years, or today, or when we ourselves gave it up, you see the history of Gaza is different than any other chiluk in Eretz Yisrael. I mean, in the times of the Shoftim, we conquered all of Eretz Yisrael, every inch, and somehow in Gaza the Plishtim rebelled against us. It was the only area in Eretz Yisrael that ever provided us with trouble in the early days when we came into Eretz Yisrael in the first place. Even in the last 50 years, here it's an area we conquered, we built it up, it was a desert, we built Batei Knesiyos, we had Beis HaKfaros there, and for us to go ahead and give it up, I mean, that's unheralded, it's unheard of. Gaza may be and may have a different status than the rest of Eretz Yisrael. Let us proceed. Okay, the pasuk says in Yehoshua and in Sefer Shoftim that there was a man by the name of Kalev ben Yefune, and Kalev ben Yefune comes to a city called Devir. The name of Devir, says the Navi in two places, it used to be called Kiryas Sefer. And Kalev made a deal. He said like this, I have a daughter, her name was Achsa, and Achsa was very beautiful, the Gemara says. She was so beautiful, says the Gemara, that people would get angry at their own wives when they would see her, the Gemara says. And Kalev says, whoever attacks and destroys and conquers the city of Devir, that used to be called Kiryas Sefer, Achsa is theirs. I will give them Achsa as a wife. That is what the pasuk says. Comes along the Sefer Arvei Nachal. The Arvei Nachal is Reb David Eibeshitz. The Levushay Srad was written by Reb David Eibeshitz. And he wants to know, why was it that of all the cities in Eretz Yisrael, Devir, which used to be Kiryat Sefer, was the hardest city to conquer. Here it is, the Jews come to Eretz Yisrael, they knock off one nation after another. They barely suffer any casualties. Their biggest casualty is, one guy. That's their biggest casualty. And yet they come to Devir, and Kalev ben Yefune understands there's no way we're going to conquer the city of Devir. And the only way we could conquer it is if I offer Achsa, my daughter, as a wife to the guy who conquers it. What was so difficult about Devir that Kalev ben Yefune realized would be so hard to conquer? That's the first question. Number two, Kalev gives a whole speech. He gives a whole drasha. That the name of the city is Devir, but it used to be called Kiryas Sefer. Number three, the pasuk says, Kalev ben Yefune says, and whoever could conquer Kiryas Sefer for me will get Achsa, my daughter, as a wife. The name of the city is not Kiryas Sefer, the name of the city is Devir. So here he's saying, not only the name of the city that it used to be, when he's making the deal, whoever strikes down the city, the only name of the city he uses is Kiryas Sefer. Why doesn't he call it its actual name? The Arvei Nachal asks further, that the Gemara in Tzmura, on Daf Tezayin, has a completely different understanding of what happened. Actually, it wasn't Kiryas Sefer. Kiryas Sefer are code words. Code words for the 300 halachos that were forgotten during the Avelos of Moshe Rabbeinu. that when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, Klal Yisrael forgot 300 halachos. Whereupon Kalev ben Yefuna says, whoever could remind us of the 300 halachos that were forgotten during the mourning of Moshe, I will let them marry my daughter Achsa. So ask the Arvei Nachal, that is a pretty far-fetched drasha. The pasuk says, whoever conquers the city of Kiryat Sefer, and the Gemara says, no, it doesn't mean the city of Kiryat Sefer, it means the 300 halachos that were forgotten during the Avelos of Moshe Rabbeinu. Says the Arvei Nachal that he heard from a Chacham Echad, and I presume this idea comes from the Magid Mimezrich, because in the Sefer Imrei Pinchas, he also brings down this idea. And this is an unbelievable concept. And that is, Eretz Yisrael is not a natural land. Eretz Yisrael is the land of the Torah. Every city in Eretz Yisrael corresponds to a different chelek of the Torah. One Masechta, let's say would be Yerushalayim, has a certain Masechta that corresponds to it. Bnei Brak has a different Masechta that corresponds to it. Tiberia has a different Masechta. And when you want to conquer a certain area of Eretz Yisrael, what you need to do is, you need to master that area of the Torah that corresponds to that city. By mastering that chelek of the Torah, by learning that chelek of the Torah, then naturally that part of Eretz Yisrael will fall into your hands. So even though we think, wow, what does that have to do with learning? Well, the guys go in there with their ammunition, with their tanks, they bulldoze the place and they conquer. No, that's not how it goes. That's the way it looks. But that's not really how it works. The way it works is Eretz Yisrael is a natural land, is a supernatural land. Now you need an army, you have to make hishtadlus, but there's a different pasuk in the Torah for every inch of Eretz Yisrael. There's a different Mishnah for every millimeter of Eretz Yisrael. There's a different Blat Gemara for every area. They come to Kiryat Sefer, and Kalev ben Yefune Beruach Kodshai understood that the city of Kiryat Sefer, what area of Torah corresponded to Kiryat Sefer? The 300 halachos that were forgotten during the mourning of Moshe Rabbeinu corresponded to the city of Kiryat Sefer. So therefore, Kalev ben Yefuna says, this city will never be conquered. Because since these 300 halachos were forgotten, we'll never conquer the city. So he makes a double deal. Whoever reminds us of the 300 halachos, and thereby conquers the city of Kiryat Sefer, I will give them my daughter Achsa as a wife. That's an amazing concept. This is a tremendous concept. That means that whenever we gain access of certain areas of Eretz Yisrael, that means we have a strong connection to that chelek in Torah that corresponds to it. And whenever you see an area in Eretz Yisrael that may prove difficult to attain and acquire, based on what we're learning here, that must mean there's a certain chelek in Torah that is beyond us, or we're not connected to sufficiently, and that's why that area of Eretz Yisrael we're not able to conquer. Has always been hard to acquire, has been an area that we on our own have given back. That must mean there's a certain chelek in Torah corresponding to it that we are not sufficiently connected to, we don't have it mastered, we haven't achieved it properly, and maybe that's why that area in Eretz Yisrael is not under our control. What chelek in Torah then corresponds to that little patch in Eretz Yisrael that's called Gaza? Is the chelek in Torah about the halachos of Gaza? Maybe. And it's very possible that of all the halachos of Eretz Yisrael, the Rashbam is going on the Akedah. The Akedah begins with the words, Achar hadvarim ha'ela, after these matters. And all the Mefarshim struggle to explain. The words Achar hadvarim ha'ela imply that there's a connection between the Akedah and what was said immediately previously. So Rashi learns, after Yishmael had bris milah at age 13, he turns to Yitzchak, who had bris milah at 8 days. He said, what do you think? You think we're a match? You think we have any connection? You had bris milah when you were a kid. You didn't know any better. I was a grown man when I had bris. I'm much better than you. To which Yitzchak said, oh yeah, if God would tell me to sacrifice myself, I would do it now. That's what Rashi says. But a little bit difficult, because the episode of the bris of Yishmael and Yitzchak were in the beginning of the parasha. So what's the connection between the Akedah? That didn't immediately precede the episode of the Akedah. Says the Rashbam. The Rashbam is Rashi's grandson. Rashbam says one of the most frightening things you'll ever hear. Says Rashbam, whenever you see the words Achar Hadvarim Ha'ela, you know what immediately preceded the Akedah? Avraham Avinu made a peace treaty with Avimelech, Avimelech's children, Avimelech's grandchildren. And Abraham said, I will not harm you, I will not harm your children, I will not harm you. We'll all live in peace in the Holy Land. Says Ribbanu Shalom, you made peace with Akum in Eretz Yisrael. And you know what Abraham did? He took 7 sheep and he split them and he made a deal with Avimelech. Bichara apoy shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu al zos. Ribbon Shalom got angry. Shaharei Eretz Pelishtim Bichlal Gvol Yisrael. The first Maramaka. The Pelishtim, Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael. Hashem said, what do you do with Goyim in Eretz Yisrael? I'm not going to translate. Lo yisechaye kol neshama. That's what you do. And we find in Sefer Yeshua that when he took the Azah, he divided it among 5 Shvatim. He divided it 5 ways. So Ribbon Shalom says, I gave you Eretz Yisrael, I gave you the Gaza, and you're going making peace treaties with Avimelech. I didn't give you Eretz Yisrael to make peace treaties. Therefore Hashem says, you know this son of yours that you waited 99 years to have, and you love him with all of your soul? You make peace in Eretz Yisrael, go kill your son. You don't make peace in Eretz Yisrael. But Avram wasn't giving away Eretz Yisrael. This is not disengagement. This is just, let's all get along like family in Eretz Yisrael. No. You don't make deals, you make deals in Eretz Yisrael, Abraham. Says Rashbam, V'ha'elokim Nisa es Abraham. Nisa doesn't mean tested. Nisa means aggravated. Maso Mariva, shepherd, antagonized. Why did Hashem antagonize Abraham? Because he made peace in Eretz Yisrael. So what do we see from here? Is Gaza part of Eretz Yisrael? Absolutely. That's what the Rashbam says openly. Eretz Pelishtim B'chlal Gvol Yisrael. Says the Medrash. The Medrash says that the Pelishtim captured the Aron for 7 months. Yeah? Why? Says Ribbanu Shalom. Number 1, you gave Avimelech 7 sheep as a peace treaty. The Philistines will make 7 wars with you throughout history. They'll win every one of them. You don't make peace with them. That's number 1. Number 2, you make peace with the Pelishtim. 7 tzaddikim are going to be killed in battle. Who are they? Shimshon, Chafni, Pinchas, Shaul, and his 3 sons. The Medrash continues. You make peace with the Pelishtim. The Pelishtim will destroy all 7 Mishkanos and Batei Mikdashim. Ayal Mayed, Gilgal, Noiv, Shilai, Givain, Beis Elamim. You make peace with the Pelishtim, you give them 7 sheep. The Pelishtim will take the Aron for 7 months. So now you understand that making peace in Eretz Yisrael is not a simple thing. Now, when the Gedolim say you have to make peace, Batla Datenu, we follow them. And the reason why they do say that sometimes is because as important as Eretz Yisrael is, Jewish life reigns supreme. V'chai bohem. But in a situation where by giving back Eretz Yisrael, there's no hope for peace, not only you can't do it, you're tampering with the worst danger imaginable. That's what the Rashbam says. 9 years ago, when there was disengagement, Rabbi Vadi Yosef was very against it. He spoke out publicly. Why? Because he did not believe it would bring any peace, and therefore, the Rashbam says you can't make peace, but it's Gaza. You know what the Rashbam says? Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael. Oh, in Parshas Toldos, we know that Avraham Avinu, when there was famine in Eretz Yisrael, he left Eretz Yisrael, he went to Mitzrayim. Now in the days of Yitzchak, Yitzchak is undergoing, he's suffering famine. Vayirav ba'aretz milvana rav arishon asher haya b'mei Avraham. Vayelech Yitzchak el Avimelech melech Plishtim Gerara. Yitzchak goes to Avimelech, the king of Plishtim, Gerar, yeah? So Hashem comes to Yitzchak, and he says, Yitzchak, don't go down to Mitzrayim. Don't go down to Mitzrayim. Stay in Eretz Yisrael. So you hear what's happening? Yitzchak's in Gaza. He's in Eretz Pelishtim. Ribbon Shalom says, don't leave. Stay in Eretz Yisrael. Says Rashi, turn over. Rashi says, Yitzchak had in mind to go to Mitzrayim, just like Avram went down to Mitzrayim. Hashem said, you can't go to Mitzrayim, you're an Oila Tamima, Chutz La'aretz is not for you. Yitzchak is about to leave Eretz Yisrael. Hashem says, don't go, stay in Eretz Yisrael. So you see very clearly from Rashi, Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael. The problem is, you look 10 psukim later, when Yitzchak is planted, Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi, Yitzchak planted, Vayimtza b'shana hahi, he found in that year, Me'ah sha'arim, 100 times. So Rashi wants to know what's the emphasis on ba'aretz hahi in that land. Says Rashi, Af al pi she'ena chashuva ke'eretz Yisrael atzma. Even though Gaza is not like Eretz Yisrael itself, ke'eretz shiva goyim, like the land of the 7 nations. So Rashi seems to be saying very clearly that Gaza is not part of Eretz Yisrael. Comes along Rebbe Eliyahu Mizrahi. It's not chashuv like Eretz Yisrael itself. What does that mean? Ulefikach amar ke'eretz Yisrael atzma keloimar ke'ikar Eretz Yisrael, like the main Eretz Yisrael. She'af al pi she'ena chashuva k'chutz la'aretz legamri. Gaza is not chutz la'aretz. Mikamakoim eina chashuva ke'eretz Yisrael atzma, but it's also not like Eretz Yisrael proper. Ulafika chazar v'amar. Therefore, Rashi repeats, ke'eretz shiva goyim. It's not like the lands of the 7 nations. The only part of Eretz Yisrael that was not occupied by the Zion Amamin was Gaza. You know who ruled Gaza? The Plishtim. Who do the Plishtim come from? Plishtim are from Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is from Chum. It's the only part of Eretz Yisrael that was never occupied. It's called the unoccupied territory. Right? These are not. It's the only part of Eretz Yisrael that was not. Hashem promised Abraham the Zion Amamin. Gaza is not from the Zion Amamin. It's a Rashi and Chumash. But even though it's not one of the Zion Amamin, it's still part of Eretz Yisrael. Is there any halachic difference between the Gaza and the rest of Eretz Yisrael? So this week's parsha talks about the borders, the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Is that historically there are 3 types of boundaries in Eretz Yisrael. 3 historical borders in Eretz Yisrael. Number 1 is the land that was given and promised to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's called Gevulei Ha'avos. All the way up north, Nahar Pras, the Euphrates River. Now, Euphrates River is north of Syria, is north of Iraq. And Abraham was promised to Abraham all the way up to Nahar Pras, all the way down to Nahar Mitzrayim. Did we ever conquer everything that was promised to Abraham? It has a certain Kedusha, but it doesn't have full Kedusha Eretz Yisrael unless the Jews conquered it when they left Mitzrayim, and that's the second borders. The second borders we need to know about are the Gevulei Mitzrayim. The Gevulei Mitzrayim are mentioned in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Maseh. Okay, and that's what I want to take a look at. That the southern border goes from Midbar Tzin. Yeah, Midbar Tzin is the part of Eretz Yisrael that's not shaded in. It goes down by Eretz Edom. It goes down the east side of the Yam HaMelech. It goes to Malei Akrabim. You see where Malei Akrabim is? The south border of Eretz Yisrael. From there, it turns to Tzina. It goes from the Negev to Kadesh Barnea. You see, Kadesh Barnea is northward to the west. It goes to Chatzar Adar. It goes to Atzmoina. And it turns to Nachal Mitzrayim. Now, according to most Mefarshim, Nachal Mitzrayim is another word for Wadi El Arish. Yeah? That's what most Mefarshim learn except for Rashi. Rashi learns Nachal Mitzrayim is the Nilos. But most Mefarshim learn Nachal Mitzrayim. Now, based on those borders, it's 100% part of Eretz Yisrael because the Gaza is about a 2-day journey northward on the west coast of Eretz Yisrael. So according to that, if the boundary cuts in by Nachal Mitzrayim, the Gaza is definitely part of Eretz Yisrael. One very interesting thing that we should bear in mind, but says Rabbi Yechiel Mechel Tukachinsky, that is impossible, because we know Malei Akrabim is near Eretz Edom, and it has to be at least 100 kilometers south of the Yam HaMelech. So it must be that the Malei Akrabim of the Torah is different than the Malei Akravim in your geography books. Malei Akravim must be what is known as Akba, the Akba Sea, Akaba. And in fact, Rav Sadia Goin tells us that in fact Malei Akravim is Akaba. Okay. So then if he conquered it, the halacha is that once you conquer Eretz Yisrael, whatever you conquer beyond is also Eretz Yisrael. Midairaisa. However, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, David, that since you didn't conquer Yerushalayim, and you left it to the Yevusim, how could you have something in right field is going to be Eretz Yisrael, and home plate is not Eretz Yisrael? Can't be such a thing. And therefore, since David had not yet conquered the Yevusi in Yerushalayim, Surya, Aram Naram, Aram Sova did not attain the status of Eretz Yisrael, it had attained the status of Kibush Yachid, and therefore some halachas it's like Eretz Yisrael, and some halachas. Yoshua ben Nun conquered Eretz Yisrael, but then there was a man by the name of Nebuchadnezzar, and he destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and he kicked us out. Kidsha Rishayna, Kidsha Lashaita, Beloi, Kidsha La'asid Lavoi. When the Jews left, there went the Kedusha. What do you mean? Eretz Yisrael doesn't have Kedusha? That's right. It didn't have Kedusha. It lost the Kedusha. Whatever Yeshua ben Nun, bam, Paka Kedushase. The Kedusha left. But then, 70 years later, Ezra came back. Kibush Ezra. It's called the Oilei Bavel. And Oilei Bavel, Kidsha Shniya, the second Kedusha. Kidsha Lashaita. Whatever Ezra conquered has Kedusha till today. Whatever Ezra didn't conquer has no Kedusha today. Did Ezra conquer Gaza? Now, one thing we need to know, there's a recurring theme in Shas, and that is there are specific cities that Ezra purposely didn't conquer. Say, purposely not conquer? You know why? Because Ezra says to himself, if I don't conquer these cities, they won't be part of Eretz Yisrael. You won't have to keep Shemitah, and the Aniyim will have what to eat during Shemitah. So there are certain cities, it's Gemara in Chagiga, Daf Gimel, it's Gemara in Yevamis, it's Gemara in Chulin, Daf Zayin, that there are certain cities in Eretz Yisrael that Ezra did not conquer, so the Aniyim have what to eat during Shemitah. For example, Beis Shan. Beis Shan, Rebbe permitted Beis Shan, it's completely parted from Trumas and Maasros. The Rambam tells us, what's the nafkamina between lands that were only conquered by Yeshua ben Nun and lands that were also conquered by Ezra? The Rambam tells us in Hilchos Shumais that if they were also conquered by Ezra, they're chayiv in Truma, they're chayiv in Meiser, they're chayiv in Shvius. But if Ezra did not conquer them, you're not chayiv in Truma, you're not chayiv in Meiser, you're not chayiv in Shvius. Says the Rambam, Ezohi ha'aret shechziku oile Mitzrayim. May Rekem shehi b'mizrach Eretz Yisrael ad hayam hagada. On the east side, Rekem. On the west side, the Mediterranean. May Ashkelon shehi l'darim Eretz Yisrael ad Akko shehi b'tzafayin. From Ashkelon in the south to Akko in the north. Please look at your maps. It's north of Gaza. Says the Rambam, Ashkelon is the border, not of the Oilei Bavel, of the Oilei Mitzrayim. That means the Rambam is saying that not only is Gaza not part of Eretz Yisrael now, it was never part of Eretz Yisrael. Most poskim do not agree with that, but that's a whopper. Shehagvul hadroimi shaloi Bavel hu Ashkelon. The southern border of the Oilei Bavel is Ashkelon. It's a Sifri at the end of Ekev. It's a Yerushalmi in Shemitah. So Reb Zev, right? Reb Zev wants to say, if you would ask me and you, is Gaza or Ashkelon part of Eretz Yisrael? Well, any yeshiva bach who ever learned Masechta Gittin and got beyond Daf Beis and Aleph, the halacha is that if you bring a get from Ashkelon, it's like from Chutz La'aretz. So it seems pretty clear from the first Mishnah in Gittin that even Ashkelon is Chutz La'aretz, certainly Gaza. And we're going to see the Marit brings a raya from there that Gaza is not considered part of Eretz Yisrael from the first Mishnah in Gittin. But then he brings down a Tosefta in Shrumais and Shvius and a Yerushalmi in Shvius that is part of Eretz Yisrael. Points out Rabbi Yechiel Michal Tikachinsky. This whole machlokes is only regarding Hilchos Trumais and Masros. But regarding Kedushas Haaretz, regarding the fact that God's eyes are on the land of Eretz Yisrael the whole year, it doesn't matter if the Oilei Bavel reconquered it or not. Regarding Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, anything that Yoshua ben Nun conquered, even if the Oilei Bavel did not conquer it, it has Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. You're Mekayim in the midst of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. You have special Hashgacha Pratis. It's Kedoime Kamisha Yesh Lo Elokah. The Gemara says anyone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, it's like they have a God. Anyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz, it's like they don't have a God. That's what the Gemara tells us in Ksubis. All of these milos of Eretz Yisrael apply whether the Oilei Bavel conquered it or not. In order for something to be part of Eretz Yisrael for anything, it had to have been conquered by Yoshua ben Nun. In order for it to be Chayiv and Trumas and Maisros, it needed to be reconquered by Ezra. What's the halachic status of Gaza? He says, Shailo me'Gaza. Yeah? You hear that? That's how the Shaila starts. Question from Gaza. Are you Chayiv and Trumas and Maisros? Says the Radvaz, the Rebbe of the Arizal. Says Radvaz, Gaza is at least, number 16, Chayeves midrabanon. Gaza is Chayiv and Trumas and Maisros midrabanon. Devadai Oilei Mitzrayim Kivshua. Vadai, it is certain, the Oilei Mitzrayim conquered it. And he brings a proof that the Gemara says, in order to determine what's part of Eretz Yisrael, you make an imaginary line from the southwestern corner by Nachal Mitzrayim all the way up to the north, and anything that falls within that imaginary line is Eretz Yisrael. And Gaza is in that imaginary line, and therefore the Radvaz says, it's definitely part of the Oilei Mitzrayim. We don't know if it's part of the Oilei Bavel, so at least it's Chayiv and Trumas and Maisros midrabanon. And he says, the Kaftor V'Ferach, who is Rav Ashturi HaParchi, who traveled through the length and breadth of Eretz Yisrael and wrote down all the halachos and hashkafas of Eretz Yisrael, one of the Rishonim, he writes, Beferish Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael. Says the Radvaz is the Rebbe of the Arizal, the Rebbe of the Shita Mekubetzes. Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael, at least the Oilei Mitzrayim, and it's at least Chayiv and Trumas and Maisros midrabanan. The Tshuva of the Maharit, Rabbi Yosef Mitrani. You ready? Get a load of the story. There's a guy by the name of Shimon. Guess where he lives? He lives in a lush, beautiful area. It's like Gan Eden. Where does he live? Gaza. And he's a businessman. He's successful. He did a lot of business. And he got involved in a certain deal, and he had to leave town. So where does he go? He goes down to Egypt. He gets married in Egypt. He has 2 sons. They get married. And now Nebuch, Shimon passes away. And the 2 boys, they want to go back to their hometown. There's no home like Gaza, right? So they want to go back to the Gaza. And the question is, could they force their wives to go with them? The halacha is that a husband is allowed to force his wife to go to Eretz Yisrael, and vice versa. A wife could force her husband to go to Eretz Yisrael. Hakol malin l'Eretz Yisrael ve'ein hakol meridin. Yeah? And if the wife doesn't want to go, she loses the ksuba. It's halacha. So now one husband says to his wife, no, let's go, Gaza. She said, of course, my dream come true. The other one says, I ain't going anywhere near there. So he says, look, I'm going to go set up shop, I'm going to start my business there, and I'll get you, I'll call for you when things are going good. Fine. So he goes there, he sends her letter after letter. She said, I ain't going to Gaza. And he comes down, he begs her. She says, I ain't going anywhere. I'm not leaving Egypt. And the question is, can he force her to go to Gaza after all? Hakol malin l'Eretz Yisrael. You could force her to go to Yerushalayim. You could force her to go to Bnei Brak. Could you force her to go to Gaza? Says the Marit. Uvani yusi hareini dan lifnei Rabbi Seinu sheyichyu. Shenire bebeirur shehi chutz la'aretz l'chol divareh. Gaza is like New York City. It's not part of Eretz Yisrael in any way. Why? What's the raya? Reb Zev, the first Mishnah in Gittin, Daf Beis. It says that if you bring a get from Ashkelon, it's like bringing a get from Chutz La'aretz. And Gaza is south of Ashkelon, so of course it's considered Chutz La'aretz. That's the first argument of the Marit. How do Jews treat Gaza? Sharei kol Yisrael asher yashvu sham me'olam v'shanim kamonios me'olam hichziku kechutz la'aretz. They've all treated it like chutz la'aretz. Not only that, says the Marit, all the Rabbanan in Yerushalayim treated Gaza like chutz la'aretz. That if you bring fruits from there, you don't have to take off trumas, you don't have to take off maisros. There are no dinei shvius. And most of the fruits of Yerushalayim, guess where they come from? most fruits in Yerushalayim come from Gaza. And no Rav ever said, be mafresh trumas ha'maisros. Why? Because the minhag ha'olam is Gaza is like Chutz La'aretz. Says the Marit, a few lines down, V'ha'kabbalah v'ha'maisa amud gadol b'hayrahu. The way people act is a big foundation in Psak. And therefore, there is no doubt it's considered Chutz La'aretz. Not only that, the same way the avir of Chutz La'aretz is metame, the avir of Gaza is metame. The great traveler, the Kapter of Perach, writes that there's no difference between what the Oilei Ezra conquered and what the Oilei Ezra didn't conquer. Says the Marit, I disagree. That since Dinei Truma don't apply, and Dinei Meiser don't apply, and Dinei Shvius don't apply, what chashivus of Eretz Yisrael is there other than the mitzvah Satliyas Ba'aretz? On the last paragraph, Umayata Benidon Shilfanenu, that since Gaza is part of Chutz La'aretz, and since Gaza is part of Chutz La'aretz, you can't force her to move from Mitzrayim to Chutz La'aretz. And then he says something further. He concludes with the following. He says, first of all, Mitzrayim is a big city. Gaza is a hick town. You can never force a wife to move to a hick town. There are no shoe stores there. No, just joking, right? There are no stores. Women like to live in the Krach, in a big city. They don't like to live in Yehupitzville. Gaza is Yehupitzville. Mitzrayim is a metropolitan city. What?
The Torah says don't live in Mitzrayim.
The Torah says don't live in Mitzrayim, but here's the final point. What is it? He says in Mitzrayim you have Talmidei Chachamim, you have Rabbanim, you have Tzadikim, you have Yeshivas. In Gaza, there are no Rabbanim, there are no Rosh Yeshivas. Afilu Poiseach Sefer Eimba. You don't even have one guy who opens up a Sefer on Shabbos. And therefore, says Marit, stay in Mitzrayim. It's Machlokes Achronim. It's Machlokes between the Radvaz and the Marit. The Radvaz says it's part of the Oilei Mitzrayim, but the Oilei Bavel never conquered it, and it's only Chayv and Trumas U'Maisos Midrabanan. But the Marit, who is a later authority, who is a very strong Amud V'Hayra, he paskins Gaza is not part of Eretz Yisrael, and in fact, in the book, Contemporary Halachic Problems, he brings down an article by Rabbi Gershuni that says that perhaps Gaza is not part of Eretz Yisrael based on the Maharit. And that is the conclusion. Comes Rabbi Yaakov Emden, and he turns the whole sugya on its heels. Rabbi Yaakov Emden in the Maruk Tzia, Le'inyan Kedusha u'mitzvas Yeshuva v'dirasa hadavar pashid etzli shehi yisera al Surya. Don't get carried away. Gaza has more Kedusha than Surya. It's not exactly like the rest of Eretz Yisrael because it was never the land of the Shiva Amimim, but it was owned by Mitzrayim. They are descendants of Mitzrayim, and the Oilei Mitzrayim conquered it, and therefore it is no less than any land that was conquered by Oilei Mitzrayim, and all the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael applies. Even though it was conquered in time of Yoshua, it's true it's the only land Yoshua conquered that the Goyim regained their own independent control. We know the Plishtim rebelled against Klal Yisrael. But in the times of David and the Malchei Yehuda, they reconquered it. In the times of David, Shlomo, and Uziyahu, they conquered it. And therefore it's not like Syria, which is Kibush Yachid. Since we reconquered it, it has the din of Oilei Mitzrayim, and it has Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. It may even have a chiyuv, trumos, and maisros midairaisa. Why? But Ezra certainly did not reconquer Gaza. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden a big chiddush. Who says in order to have the status of kibush Ezra, Ezra had to conquer it? As long as the Jews during any period of Bayis Sheni conquered it, it could also have the status of kibush Ezra. And as we know, the Malchei Chashmonoim, they conquered part of Gaza. Hordis conquered part of Gaza. And therefore, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, you could possibly make the case that not only does it have Kedushas Haaretz, it's even Chayiv and Trumos and Maisros Midairaisa. But Shani La'atzmi, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Gaza is more part of Eretz Yisrael than Surya, than Aram Naharayim, than Aram Tsoiva. It's definitely part of Oilei Mitzrayim. It may even be part of Oilei Bavel. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, but I'm not going to just paskin based on Tanakh. And he brings, I tried to see, could anyone support me? Baruch Hashem, I found the tshuva of the Radvaz. And the Radvaz was asked, is Gaza part of Eretz Yisrael? And the Radvaz says it's definitely part of Oilei Mitzrayim. And it's Chayiv and Shumas Amaisos Midrabanon. But lo and behold, I found the tshuva of the Marit, and I could not believe it. The Marit writes, Gaza is not part of Eretz Yisrael at all. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, b'mechilas kavoidoi, ein mizer raya shel klum. The raya of the Marit is not substantiated. What's the raya? Because if you bring a get, a divorce document from Ashkelon, it's like bringing it from Chosaretz. The dinim of Gittin are not dependent on Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. The dinim of Gittin are dependent on the level of education of the Jewish people there. And since in Ashkelon there was a low level of education, it's like bringing it from Chutz Haaretz. But in terms of Kedushas Haaretz, of course Gaza is part of Oilei Mitzrayim, it may even be part of Oilei Bavel. Emden, but the Marit got up and he testified that look around, all the Jews, all the Gedolim, all the Rabbanim for centuries have treated Gaza like Chutz Haaretz. Doesn't the attitude, the prevalent attitude of Klal Yisrael mean something? Did the Marit ever hear of the Radvaz? He was also an Orthodox Jew. He said Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael. So which rabbis did the Marit interview when he took his poll? That the Marit says everybody holds that Gaza is part of Chutz Haaretz. The Radvaz didn't think so. But still, it says Rav Yaakov Emden, who am I to argue on the Marit? Marit is one of the Amudei Ha'ira. We have to make sense out of what he's saying. The Marit says Gaza is Chutz Haaretz, and all the Rabbanim treat it like Chutz Haaretz, and all the fruit that is brought to Yerushalayim, nobody takes Truma Meiser from. How do we explain that? Says Rav Yaakov Emden, the first thing you need to know, unequivocally, Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael. How do I know? Because it's a pasuk in Chumash that the Rebbeinu Shalom took Moshe Rabbeinu. He showed him Kol Eretz Yehuda Ad Hayom Ha'acharoin, right, until the Yam HaTichain. So it means Moshe Rabbeinu is looking at all the land of Yehuda until the Mediterranean. Guess which land is in that purview? Gaza. And Hashem's saying, look at Eretz Yisrael. So there's no question that Gaza is part of it. So what did the Marit mean when he said that all the Gedolim treat Gaza like Chutz Haaretz? And everybody agrees Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael, and it has just as much Kedushas Eretz Yisrael as any other city. And even so, the Marit is correct that the Gedolim consider it Chutz Haaretz. Listen carefully. If a guy has a farm in Bnei Brak, and he grows grain, and you buy the grain, or you take over the field, do you have to give Trumas and Maisers from that grain? Yeah. Yeah. Because even though the guy bought it, it's questionable whether a guy could make a kinyan in the land to uproot it from Trumas and Maisers. But says Rav Yaakov Emden, but in a part of Eretz Yisrael that was conquered by the Oilei Mitzrayim, but not conquered by the Oilei Bavel, so there the Chiyuv and Trumas Maisros is only Midrabanan to begin with. Everybody would agree that if a guy owns a farm in that city, that produce is pater from Trumas Maisros. So Gaza was conquered by the Oilei Mitzrayim. It was probably not conquered by the Oilei Bavel. And therefore, whatever Goyim own in Gaza is pater from Trumas Maisros. Whatever Jews own in Gaza is chayv in Trumas Maisros. Now you're living in Yerushalayim. Most of the produce in Yerushalayim comes from Gaza. And you don't know, did it come from Jews or did it come from Goyim? So what do? Holchin, Achar, Haroiv. You follow the majority. Most produce in Yerushalayim that came from Gaza is from Goyim. In Gaza, the Chiyuv of Trumas Maisros Bechlal is only Midrabanan. Since it most probably came from Goyim, Goyim could uproot the Chiyuv of Trumas Maisros in Gaza. That's what the Marit meant, that most Gedolim treat Gaza like Chutz Haaretz. It doesn't mean Chas v'Shalom Gaza is Chutz Haaretz. It just means most of the produce that comes from there, since it's probably owned by Goyim, is exempt from Trumas Maisros, because regarding Gaza we say Yesh Kinyan La'ovdei Klechavim Lakar Michiyav Trumas Amaisras. That could be a way to reconcile the Marit with the Radvaz, where we come to the following conclusion. Everybody agrees Gaza is part of Oilei Mitzrayim. Is it part of Oilei Bavel? It's questionable. If you get produce from Gaza, you don't have to be mafresh Trumas Amaisras, because you could assume it came from a goy, and yesh kinyan la'akum la'akar chiyav Trumas Amaisras, at least in Gaza. However, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, if you're living in Chutz Aretz and you turn to your wife and you say, guess what? We're moving to Eretz Yisrael. And she says, really? Where are we going? A brand new apartment in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim? You say, no. We're moving to Gush Katif. And she said, I'm not going. Could you force your wife to go to Gaza? The Maritz said no. Says the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, I argue with him. Says the Rabbi Yaakov Emden, since when does the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael depend on the ability to mekayim the mitzvah Satuliyas Ba'aretz? There's no connection between the two. Since when we're going to be Dairesh Time of the Kra? We're going to say the only inyan of living in Eretz Yisrael is if you could fulfill the mitzvahs? Says Rav Yaakov Emden, we know till today, Rav Yaakov Emden is of the opinion, that till today there's a mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel. You hear this? Rav Yaakov Emden holds there's a mitzvah to go up to Eretz Yisrael 3 times a year, even today. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, but probably most people, right, if I would go up to Eretz Yisrael, I don't own land in Eretz Yisrael, I don't even own land in New York, right? So let's say I would go there, yeah? But I can't be Mekayim any mitzvah Satuz Baratz, I don't own land there. Are you going to say there's no mitzvah of Aliyah L'Regel because I can't fulfill mitzvah Satuz Baratz? The two have nothing to do with each other. The mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael is not contingent, is not dependent on the mitzvah Satuz Baratz. So therefore says Rav Yaakov Emden, I heartily disagree with the Marit. Marit says, since you can't be Mekayim the mitzvah Satuz Baratz in Gaza, therefore there's no mitzvah of Yishuv. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, there's still a mitzvah of Yishuv, and therefore I paskin halacha l'maisa that if you want to go to Eretz Yisrael and you like Gaza, your wife could also force you. So you got to behave, right? So therefore says Rav Yaakov Emden, the Marit says that in Gaza there are no Rabbanim, there are no Tamei Chachamim. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, who cares? Doesn't the Gemara say it's better to live in a city in Eretz Yisrael that's completely Goyim than to live in a city in Chutz Aretz that's full of Jews? And therefore says Rav Yaakov Emden, since I paskin that Gaza is full-fledged part of Eretz Yisrael, there is no doubt that one spouse could force their spouse to move to Gaza. And therefore, says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, living in Eretz Yisrael is not dependent on any mitzvah. We live there, the inyan of living there is because that's where Hashem is the Melech, that's where the Einei Hashem is located. Like Chazal say, Kol Hadar B'Eretz Yisrael, Doime Kamisha Yesha Elokah. It's Einei Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereishis Hashana Ad Achar Shana. And therefore, the fact that nobody in Gaza opens a sefer is irrelevant. Says Rav Yaakov Emden, it's not even true. That today, Baruch Hashem, says Rav Yaakov Emden, there's a big kahal in Gaza of Shomrei Torah who live in great tranquility under the Yishmaelim, he says. Hashem should bless them because at least they're not Oved Avodah Zarah, who let the Jews, is he talking 18th century, who let the Jews live in Gaza in great peace. And therefore, it's the end of number 19. Therefore, he says, you want to take your family up to Gaza, gesundheit. The Maharit seems to be defended by the following thought. We know in the Gemara in Ksubis, listen carefully, the Gemara says that anyone who lives in Chutz Aretz, it's like they have no God. Says the Gemara, what's the proof? Because David HaMelech says, when he had to run out of Eretz Yisrael, he says the following pasuk, Ki gershuni hayoim mehistapeach benachlas Hashem. The Rebbeinu Shalom has chased me away. Says the Gemara, we see from here, if you live in Chutz Aretz, it's as if you don't have a God, says the Gemara. Where was David HaMelech living when he said it's as if he has no God? Guess what? He was living in Gaza. So what do you see? Very clearly from David HaMelech, he's saying when you live in Chutz Aretz, it's like you have no Eloka. He was living in Gaza. So that should be close the book. Now we know Gaza is not part of Eretz Yisrael. Says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, no, you have to know what was going on over there. That is when Gaza was occupied by the Plishtim. And David HaMelech became an Eved to Achish, the king of the Plishtim, where he consented to be part of the Philistine army and even attack Jews. So under those circumstances, when you're joining the enemy, then Gaza is not part of Eretz Yisrael. But under normal circumstances, says Rav Yaakov Emden, Gaza is definitely part of Eretz Yisrael. And the proof, he says, she'eino of tshuva, that you can't question and is immutable and cannot be challenged, is the fact that Hashem told Yitzchak, don't leave Eretz Yisrael. And where did he stay? Big Gerar, in the land of Gaza. And therefore Rav Yaakov Emden concludes, bottom line, in his opinion, not only is Gaza part of Eretz Yisrael, even the Maharit would agree it's part of Eretz Yisrael. The Maharit is only talking about buying produce from Gaza, because since it's Roiv Akum, you could assume it was bought from a Goyish field. And in the world of Rav Yaakov Emden, not like it says in number 18 in a certain article that perhaps Gaza is not part of Eretz Yisrael, according to Rav Yaakov Emden, who as far as I know is the last word on this, everybody agrees Gaza is part of Eretz Yisrael. It has Kedushas Eretz Yisrael. If you live there, you have special Hashgacha Pratis. It's Daima Kamishi Yesh Alakah. And all the skulos and all the brachos of the Yoshvei Haaretz apply just as much to the Yoshvei Gaza. So Rabbi Sai, perhaps then, the reason why this has been such a difficult area of Eretz Yisrael to conquer is because the tremendous confusion and misrepresentation of the halachic status. Here you have Sfarim that say that it's not part of Eretz Yisrael. It says Rabbi Yaakov Emden, you have to know what the Maharit means. If you understand, the Maharit just means that if you buy produce from there, you'll have to rely on the fact that most farms are owned by Goyim, so you could assume Yesh Kinyan Ba'akam Lakar Dinei Trumas HaMaisros. Ends Rabbi Yaakov Emden with the following thought. This is all until today. But when Mashiach comes, the Gemara tells us, the borders of Eretz Yisrael will expand. You know what way? There's an opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that you take the northern point of Eretz Yisrael, Kziv, in the north, you take, or actually all the way up to Hamas, no pun intended, right? All the way up there, the area near Aram Tzaiva. You go all the way down in the south to Nachal Mitzrayim, Wadi El Arish, and you make two horizontal lines that continue out latitude from 30 degrees north of the equator to 35 degrees north. And those lines stretch out through the Mediterranean and include all the islands of the Mediterranean. Cyprus, Candia. It goes through Europe. It includes Spain. It includes Portugal. It includes Africa. It includes Morocco. All of these lands, when Mashiach comes, will all be annexed and part of Eretz Yisrael. Yiratzain, Sheyibana, B'mher v'yameinu, Shvizach v'gul, Shem v'yeskal, Shem her v'yameinu, Amen.